Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa, the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And if I get into a coughing fit, it is Wes's fault because he messed up my countdown on the intro, and so he already has me laughing. There it is. I apologize. But make sure you're listening to Wes and Blake Silverman on the Pin Down over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel. Omari, I'm going to bring you in because I need to take a break here for a second. Saw somebody ask you on Twitter, what was it like last night trying to cover a game while this trade news was breaking?
Not fun. I don't think I watched any of the third quarter. The trade, like it happened with I want to say maybe midway through the third. Like I can't even remember now. All I know is that I barely watched any of the third and probably not even most of the fourth until it got to the end. And then it was like, okay, no, I have to watch because they keep closing these 8-point gaps. So, that's how it goes sometimes. I think that's the first time. No, that's the second time I've covered a trade that happened in the middle of a game because when I covered the Grizzlies, that was when the Dylan Brooks, Marshawn Brooks confusion happened. And that was my first trade deadline. I didn't really have sources. I didn't have anything. And then this happens and it's just like there's also a locker room fight that broke that season. So they really kind of put me through it in my first year. But yeah, anyway, I don't recommend covering trades in the middle of games. Preferably you cover a game first and then the trade after, or maybe the trade first or the game after. But that's not how it works out all the time. So anyway, we're past the deadline now, and nobody is happier about that than me. Trust me. So
yeah, it was a lot. I was trying to watch the game, get it watched because I knew today was going to be a crazy day, and then the Butler deal broke. So I had to record with Sam. So I'm recording that. I'm like, dang, I'm going to get behind on the game now. He had mentioned that hey, Pistons probably get involved in this. They are involved, and then then everything was just crazy beyond that. So I don't know that we have to rehash everything, Omari. At the end of the day, for me, it's really about the net of what happened. So take everybody through, I guess, real quick, kind of who quote unquote came to Detroit, even though they may not have actually come to Detroit, but break it down a little bit and then get us to the net return for this deadline. And then we can kind of break down what we think about it. Everybody tuned in right now, thank you for joining us. Hit the like, subscribe, all of that. We appreciate you. We're going to go about 15 minutes or so giving our thoughts. Then we'll go about 15 minutes of your questions and comments, whether it's about the deadline or moving forward. And then we're going to cut it off there. I'm still a little under the weather, just trying to get through it. Omari needs some sleep himself, as do Robin, our guy, and Wes. So break down the trade for everybody, get us to the net results, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so really it all kind of happened in 3 separate trades as far as how they were reported. So you have the initial KJ Martin deal, which brought in 2 second-round picks, and then they acquired Lindy Waters III and Josh Richardson from the Warriors and the Heat, just as kind of part of that Jimmy Butler swap that you just talked about, Bryce, and they got a second-round pick in that as well. And then today, you trade Josh Richardson and you trade KJ Martin and a different second-round pick to Utah, and you get Dennis Schroeder. So in the end, the Pistons end up with Dennis Schroeder, Lindy Waters III, a net of 2 second-round picks, and then they also waived Wendell Moore Jr. today. So overall, just a very marginal deadline. We've kind of talked about on the pod, here, and I've also written that they weren't looking to really shake the roster up. They ended up not trading anybody on the roster. They just they added 2 people, and then they did waive Wendell Moore. But beyond that, the roster, essentially is intact. And then they also address their biggest need, which was for a secondary ball handler and Dennis Schroeder, who, just as far as the realistic options that you could get without giving anything up, I would say he was probably one of the better options that were out there. So yeah, marginal deadline, but you come out with a couple players and you address your biggest need. And they also have, I believe, 13 second-round picks now, which is something. So
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
something. So real quick, Cade Phillips says, first time watching live. Thank you, Cade. Appreciate it. Bryce, you got to get Omari a bobblehead of himself so y'all both can push the agenda. Here is the bobblehead B Bobbler. I've tried to push the agenda. I haven't heard from him. I felt like a sponsor was in the works here, but great bobblehead maker right there. Even for the Pistons, YouTube user Bryce, get some rest. You've been putting in great work fighting through illness. Appreciate it. Again, guys, put your questions and comments in there, and then we'll get to those next. Omari, I want to stay on the second round pick thing for now. I'm going to bury the most important person until a little bit later. I want to spend most of the time on Dennis Schroeder, but I want to get these other things out of the way first. 2 second round picks. Essentially, Detroit sends out nothing, right? Like literally, they didn't send out anything other than having to waive Wendell Moore, right? So
Yeah.
you a couple more seconds. I think it's 13 or 14 second round picks. I know people say like, oh, second round picks just get thrown around like crazy. They're not that important, whatever. Listen, Oklahoma City bought a first round pick with 5 seconds in last year's draft. DeAndre Hunter got acquired with, yes, like they can be attached and be useful down the road. I wasn't all about just second round picks, but adding a couple more, especially when you're going to have all your first round picks after this offseason plays out. All of a sudden, the pick situation for Detroit isn't as bad looking as it was at one time, Omari.
No, it's not. And there's always debate about the actual value of second round picks, but it's just one of those things where they don't really matter until they do, until there's some weird deal where there's a gap of first round picks that can't be offered for whatever reason. So the second round picks kind of come in and fill that gap. And we've seen teams essentially trade 5 seconds as the equivalent of a first, which is not really equivalent to a first, but just, essentially to get a deal across the finish line. So yeah, I mean, we don't know what it'll become or if it'll become anything, right? But it's just more tools in the tool chest. Obviously, if they make the playoffs this year, that obligation they owe to the Minnesota Timberwolves is a top 13 protected pick. They would get off of that. So you could look at it as essentially you get Schroeder and increases your odds of making the playoffs, getting a top 13 seed, and then you essentially get off that first round pick obligation that way, right? So yeah, 13 second round picks. I don't know what they're going to do with them, but they do have value. It's kind of like change. Like you acquire enough change, eventually you're going to be able to buy something. Like it's eventually going to pay off in some manner. So we just have to wait and see what that ends up being.
Especially when you're getting it for essentially free, right? Like
Yeah.
you're literally picking up change off the sidewalk. You're not giving something up for it. I will say, as I was looking through those, and I don't trust any site right now for it to be 100% correct. And that's no knock on any side. It's just hard right now at the deadline. A lot of those aren't great second round picks, but still there's a multitude of them. Lindy Waters, real quick, floor spacer, shooter, really good off ball mover. My thought with Lindy Waters, at least for this year, is Tim Hardaway Jr. misses a game, Malik Beasley misses a game, and you at least have someone who can go in and fill the theoretical role of what those guys do night in and night out.
Yeah, his shooting splits really have not been good this year, and I'm not exactly sure why. Like outside of what he played here in Detroit like a month ago, I haven't really watched a lot of Lindy Waters, but he played pretty well in that game against the Pistons. I remember him knocking down some threes in the second half and keeping things pretty competitive. And that was probably the first time I'd really watched him play. But yeah, 6'6", like he's 27, but clearly has the ability to make shots. Last season he was in OKC and his efficiency was much better. So maybe he just had a nice little audition for himself in Detroit, and the front office liked what they saw. But like you said, if he could just come in and give you some of that off-ball shot making you get from a guy like Beasley, then that's all you really need, I think, from that role for him.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's like I'm not gonna try to overdo this like it's some big pickup or something like that. He can shoot the ball, and I just think that there's a chance that on a given night, an isolated night, one of those guys is missing, and you get you have him. I was looking. I knew he played at Oklahoma State. I thought maybe him and Cade overlapped, but they actually did not. They missed each other by 1 year. Lindy was out in 1920, and then Cade played in 2021. So let's get to the guy people want to talk about. probably the most exciting addition at this deadline. I know the timeline seemed to be melting down a little bit as we got into the final hour, and it wasn't looking like Detroit was going to add anything. They pull it and they get Dennis Schroeder. And to me, he makes a lot of sense, at least for this year. He's an expiring deal. You need a guy that can handle the ball. You need a guy that can pressure the rim. And it seems like at the very least, that's something he can do.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Say that again. I was reading one of the comments and zoned out briefly. It's been a long day. Please say that again.
Just thoughts on Schroeder and his
thoughts on Schroeder. No, I mean, if you're like I mentioned it earlier, but if you're just coming up like on paper with a guy, with Schroeder's skill set, like that fits what the Pistons need to a T. And I feel like if you just evaluate the market and look at who realistically can you get without giving anything up, like he's probably one of the best case scenarios that you could have come up with, right? So, like, he's a guy that could shoot. Like, obviously, he moves the ball, career above 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. Can put some points up, but he defends too. Like, he doesn't really have a lot of holes in his game, and just as somebody who could come in, give you 20, 25 minutes a night, either alongside Cade, running the second unit, he does all of that for you. So, yeah, overall, like, I think he feels that need for a secondary ball handler pretty well.
Mr. Ray, O2 hit him with the one more time. I love it. O2 is Victor asked, can Schroeder really defend? He's not like locked down. It's not
he's solid, yeah.
But he's solid. And so listen, guys, selfless plug, shameless plug, not selfless, the opposite of selfless, shameless plug over on the Motor City Hoops Substack. I posted kind of my raw notes. You guys kind of know how this goes. If you've been over there, it has his stats for this season, his last 5 seasons, which essentially have been pretty consistent. The last 5 seasons, O2, 14 points, a little over 5 assists. He's just above 40% from the field, mid-30s three-point shooter, obviously on an expiring contract. But I'll just read real quick here, Omari, kind of mine. Schroeder, get to the bucket when he has it going, breaks down the defense, scoring the ball really well. Getting buckets in the 4th, taking the Garland matchup is a note I made. And then huge buckets down the stretch. So there's some notes there that make a lot of sense for what this Pistons team. I know somebody like highlighted some of those that were specific to what we saw with the Cavs game last night, and kind of made light of that. But yeah, I mean, just a solid guard who I think fits what this team is missing in terms of that downhill, penetrate the defense, attack, take some of those matchups that those smaller, twitchier guys, the Darius Garlands, if they play the Mavs, the Kyrie Irving matchup, the Steph Currys, if they play the Warriors, those type of guys. Yeah, I like it. I think it's a really good addition. He was awful in Golden State, Omari, and he was awesome in Brooklyn. So the Golden State offense is very different than what he's going to run in Detroit, right?
Yeah. And so he was taking a lot of mid-range jumpers and not getting to the rim at all in Golden State. Like, I looked at his shot profile, and he was taking like 9% of his shots at the rim, but he's usually around 25, which is a huge difference. So
yeah, and that Golden State offense is just so much movement and flow and all of that. Like, I think he gets to Detroit, he runs a lot of ball screens with Isaiah Stewart or Jalen Duren, whoever he's on the court with. He's able to break down the defense that way. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. Somebody brings up an interesting idea. What does this mean for Sasser? I find it hard to believe. I think Roger's kind of trolling with this. Just what we need is another 6-foot guard. I understand the comment there. I don't see those guys sharing the floor together a lot. I just wonder if what Sasser's role ends up being, I guess.
Yeah, I think it becomes a lot more situational because a lot of what you get from Sasser, you also get obviously from Schroeder, with probably the key difference being that Sasser is just a stronger overall shooter and, more of a catch and shoot guy in that regard. So, I think there are still scenarios where you can have Sasser on the floor, like especially if he's alongside Cade, but it gives JB more flexibility to where I think in some ways it could help Sass in that he does not have to automatically be the ball handler, right? Like, there may be some matchups where you could even put him and, Schroeder on the floor together if you have enough size around them. It gives you a lot more, I think, versatility to where you don't have to lean on Sasser in ways that maybe aren't always best for him. Like if you just get going with somebody that has a shooter, that's probably best for all parties.
Yeah, I mean, they are very different players in the way they go about getting their buckets and attacking the defense. I think Schroeder is definitely more of a downhill player that's going to create for others. And that's not Sasser's game as much, where it's more, yes, playing with the ball in his hands, but he's kind of attacking for himself a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
times. He has had a rough stretch here recently. So it will be interesting how that is. Guys, thank you everybody joining us right now. We appreciate you so much. Please hit the like, the subscribe. If you're listening after the fact, leave a rating, review, all of that. Again, we're going to keep this one a little bit shorter. We will be back again on like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We haven't talked about it, but we'll be back in the next 4 or 5 days after we see some of this play. But we're going to go to a short break. We are going to come back. We're not done yet. But we'll get to some of the questions. So if you have them, put them in the chat. We'll go another 15 minutes or so and touch on all of that. We'll get to all of those right after this.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and we're just going to go ahead and dive into your questions here. With question, Cade is questionable with a bum ankle. This is from Chill Damon. Cade is questionable with a bum ankle, so Dennis might start his first game. Yeah, like I saw TBD on if Dennis will be available tomorrow, and obviously, well, I guess not obviously, Cade is questionable with an ankle tomorrow, so we'll have to wait and see his status on that. But yeah, this is all wait and see. Like that's always the main question people have after trades is when is this player going to make their debut? And the answer is always I don't know. We'll have to wait and see because it literally varies for every single trade on all sorts of factors. So we'll just have to see.
Steven Sugg says the Pistons got players, draft picks, and didn't give up a single player or asset. That's an A++ deadline trade in my book. I know some fans were wanting a little bit more, but yeah, it seems like there's a lot of positivity. Sharon Dalton says, I'm loving this move, fellas. Aruna, are the Pistons positioned to be players in the buyout market? If so, is there any names that are interesting? My understanding, Omari, is they still have the room exception, so they would have roughly 8 million or something like that, somewhere around there to do something if they wanted to be players in that market.
Somewhere, but they would also have to waive somebody else.
Correct.
So, so I guess, I mean, obviously it depends on the player and who they would waive, but clearly they see something with Waters. They waived Wendell Moore, for him. Like that doesn't mean you can't waive somebody else or make a different move. But my understanding has always been that they really want to keep this roster intact with how good it's been. So again, it would just depend on the player and if it makes sense for this roster.
Yeah, and just so everybody does know, Schroeder is a expiring contract on the books for 13 this year, but unrestricted free agent. Lindy Waters, same thing, unrestricted free agent next offseason. So this didn't add any money to the books based off where they were anyway. YouTube user always here with us. It's a good deadline, no bad deals, a few good deals, but no great deals. Colin Wood, do we think Trajan pulls the trigger on a Duren trade that the Lakers were exploring if he doesn't have such a good January? So interesting. I don't know that we have to answer that directly, but interesting that Pelinka sounds like he called the Pistons about Jalen Duren.
Yeah, no, I saw that report. Yeah, I mean that's really tough to answer. Like I think it's a fun thought experiment. If the Pistons are more so looking to be sellers at the deadline, if they're not where they're at right now, like let's say they're closer to like the 10 or 11 seed. Like I never got the sense that they would go into the season looking to trade the young guys. But again, if they're not where they are now, that's an interesting thought experiment for sure.
It was interesting. Like I'll just say real quickly, I feel like the Mark Williams return probably is because Pelinka called the Hornets and wanted to trade for a player that they weren't dead set on moving, and I feel like he paid a premium. Mark Williams has been very productive, but Mark Williams has been often injured for his 3 seasons in the NBA. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about that with Duren. Like obviously they got to connect in a unprotected 2031 first. How valuable do you think a Lakers unprotected 2031 first is when they got Luka Doncic? Like, I don't know, but I didn't think these guys were going to be on the move or really on the table at this deadline either. I think this offseason things could get a little bit more interesting. Chili says, does it feel weird not reporting on trading Knox for a second for the first time in years?
Hey, look, I'm always ready for the Kevin Knox return. So you can make that call whenever you want, Fraser.
Yeah. Okay. How much cap do we have next season? So I've talked to Keith Smith about this a little bit. It kind of depends on what they do with Tim Hardaway Jr., I think.
Mhm.
It also depends what happens with Cade Cunningham and all NBA. So conveying their first round picks obviously takes some money off the potential books, but Cade making all NBA, I think, adds like 8 million to the books. And then Tim Hardaway Jr. has a pretty big cap hold. So, like, I think Detroit is truly Omari in a situation where they could play under or over the cap. And I think either way could be like it. Malik is really the guy that I'm concerned about. So I don't know how far under they can if they're just better operating over and then just using the non-tax MLE anyway. So
Yeah, and that's definitely a wait and see for me. I'm not gonna like my head is not completely around the cap situation for this upcoming summer yet. Just because a lot of it was just going to be waiting to see what they did at the deadline first, obviously. But we'll certainly have to get Keith Smith on here and kind of walk us through the scenarios that they're facing.
yeah, because I it is a touch confusing because when you just add up their
Mhm.
money, it seems like they should be able to get. I had this conversation around the Miles Turner thing. If they are able to get under, without, of course, like if you traded Tobias for nothing in return or something like that, it wasn't a crazy amount,
Mhm.
right? So it wasn't a ton. Cade Phillips, I know it's not the focus today, but Amari, all good with Cade. Oh, yeah. So we touched on the ankle there. David B joining late from Canada. Love it.
What's up, David?
Always appreciate anybody. And yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from. We love it. Will J, what up, fellas? I love the move. Always a fan of his game. I assume talking about Schroeder there. YouTube user, would you draft a big in the second round in this draft or sign Day'Ron Sharp as Duran insurance?
Depends on the big. Um, I mean, I like Day'Ron Sharp's game. I know you're a Day'Ron guy, Bryce,
Yep.
but it really just depends on the big, honestly, and it depends on also I think what type of archetype of big you're going for. But yeah, it's tough for me to answer that in a vacuum, especially since we haven't really seen Day'Ron Sharp play as well. You might have more on that, Bryce, being the draft guy, but for me, it's very much dependent on who that second round center is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very big Day'Ron Sharp fan, just in terms of a guy that grabs a lot of rebounds, play finishes, that stuff. Some names, if people want to look into it, that I have in this range. There's a Markovic kid out of KK Mega. That's where Nikola Topic started his season last year. Maxime Renault is at Stanford. Ryan Kalkbrenner is the kid at Creighton. Rocco Zakarski is over in the NBL. Hanson Yang is from China. Flory Badunga is at Kansas right now, coming on a little bit later in the season. So there's some interesting names that could be there with the second round pick that right now is projected to be in the top 10 of that second round. I don't hate that. I don't hate either idea, to be honest with you. I don't mind. So Danny Wolf is an interesting name. I don't consider Danny Wolf a big, like, I realize he's 7 foot, but like, I don't know that Danny Wolf is coming in and playing center, I guess. It would be my thing. Arthur, don't bring up Rasheer Fleming because then this podcast will last another 30 minutes. I'll also say I don't see Rasheer Fleming as a center either. Like, I think Danny Wolf is going to play the 4. I think if you're excited about Danny Wolf, it's because it's a 7 footer that can like move and has some of that. So, all right, we'll keep going here. We'll jump this super chat. So thank you from Mark. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Yes, Mr. Ray says, yes, Danny Wolf may play spot minutes at the 5. I don't think you're drafting him as a 5-man. So Mark says, am I the only one that's relieved that we won't have to watch Schroeder cook us for at least half a season? Watching from Perth, Western Australia. Let's go, Perth. I love it. They got a draft pick out there. Ben Henschel, Mark, is a really interesting player out there playing for Perth right now. Obviously, Saar played for them last year. So, yeah, it seems like Schroeder was one of those guys that comes in and just plays really well. Kind of like you mentioned with Lindy Waters as well, whenever he played against the Pistons.
Yeah, Schroeder is definitely on the list of players who just cook against the Pistons for some reason. So, like in my experience, anytime you get a guy that always cooks you, he tends to cook for you as well. Like, I don't know what scientific property that is, but like I feel like there's something to that.
We
So.
should get a science teacher on the podcast and ask him, or
Aren't you a science teacher?
One that teaches science and played basketball at a decently high level. I'm sure he would know. So
who could that be?
we'll see if we can find one. But Mark, thank you so much. We appreciate the shout out. We appreciate the super chat. And hope you're doing well in Australia. That's awesome. So thank you so much. Tweet House must be a science teacher, so maybe that person can tell us. Victor, I think this makes Tech more of a spot up shooter and not dribble. LOO, we should see his role return to that. Hopefully,
That's a fair point because I feel like Tech has had to create. Like I feel like he's felt like he's had to create because he's had. I need to look it up, but I feel like he has probably played a lot of his minutes without Cade just because of the way the rotation breaks down. So I'll be curious to see if this leads to the Fontecchio resurgence because if you could get him back to shooting 40% from three, like that's pretty big time.
Listen, I want to be clear. I was a huge Simone Fontecchio fan, right? I put him in the starting lineup coming into the season. I am tired of the Fontecchio off the dribble stuff. Just catch and shoot, my guy, please. But to your point, to your guys' point here, Omari, maybe he did feel necessary, like he had to take on some of those responsibilities because there wasn't somebody else there. Tweet House says, I played NAIA. Does that count? Absolutely. College basketball is college basketball, my guy. Like, yeah, of course. Steven says, all backup point guards cook against the Pistons. I mean, Ty Jerome was pretty good last night, but Ty Jerome is awesome. Ryan Anton, do they have to waive someone now? Amari,
not anymore.
You reported this with Wendell Moore.
Yeah, they waived Wendell Moore, so they're back at 15.
Yeah. Thoughts on the moves of the other 6 to 10 teams? Okay, I didn't understand this question initially. Now I do. So let's just run those down real quick. We'll just do the East so this doesn't drag out. So what? The Heat traded Jimmy Butler, got back Wiggins, essentially was the big piece in that.
Yeah.
I mean, Butler wasn't playing anyway, and Wiggins has been good this year. I don't like, I know it's a negative in terms of Butler versus Wiggins, but when you figure Butler wasn't playing and now you get Wiggins, I almost feel like they're going to get better just because of that. I don't know.
I'm curious. Like they did kind of tread water without him. Like you still have Hero and Bam, and like Wiggins is a perfectly fine rotation piece there. So I don't really know what to make of it. Like I feel like this is when Spoelstra's at his best, but he just has these kind of like, rosters that your best player is like a B+ guy. And like we'll see. Like they were kind of in a tough spot. And I feel like they probably made the best of it. So we'll see. I didn't hate their deadline. Like they were gonna be forced into a tough spot regardless. So
yeah, they didn't have a choice. Orlando essentially set put. I think they were one of the teams that did nothing. The Hawks had a very interesting deadline where they moved DeAndre Hunter and Bogdanovich. Bogdanovich hadn't had a good season. Hunter was maybe the favorite for 6th man of the year, but they did get back Karis LeVert. They got back Terrence Mann. They got back George Niang. I think they got worse because Hunter is the best player of all those names, but I don't think they got as bad as well. I think the biggest thing with Atlanta and Detroit staying above them is the Jalen Johnson injury. Like that's the biggest thing that keeps Detroit afloat above them, I think, Omari.
Yeah, that's a huge loss for him. He's one of my favorite guys to watch too.
He's so good, man. He is so good. And Bones Island. And then Chicago traded Zach LaVine, extended Lonzo Ball and did nothing else. I don't know what Chicago. I mean, I
haven't understood their plan for like 3 years. So like I don't know.
I don't think that's a bad deal for Lonzo Ball.
No, it's not.
I just don't. Why do they still have Vucevic on this team? Like, why? And they have like 6 point guards. Maybe that's a team that could be scary for the Pistons because
they also have like no bigs. Like
they have Vooch and Jalen Smith, but then they have like no forward wing. Like I don't know, man.
Except Buzelis,
Patrick Williams isn't having a very weird roster. Interesting one here. Is there any other ball handlers that got moved today that y'all would have preferred to Dennis Schroeder? I don't think so. Is there a name that stands out to you?
No. Like I would say, I mean, as far as guys they could have realistically gotten, no. I mean, like who was like the best ball handler move was De'Aaron Fox. Obviously, they weren't going to get him, but otherwise, nobody really comes to mind for me. Honestly, I feel like of all those types of guys I removed, Shooter was one of the better ones.
Like LeVert does some of that, right?
Yeah.
So like he's on an expiring as well.
Like I'm just trying to think of point guards that I removed. Like it doesn't seem like a lot of these deals included Like,
Reggie Jackson and Jared Butler got flipped for each other along with picks.
yeah, and then Reggie got waived.
Yeah. I don't know, guys. If there's names in the chats that were Luca, yeah, Luca would have been good. If there's names we're not thinking of off the top,
Oh
throw
yeah,
chat.
Marcus Smart. Schroeder's been better than Marcus Smart.
Yeah.
Granted, they got a first round pick to take his salary.
To take his salary, yeah.
Yeah, I actually had when I was doing the fake trades, I actually had the Pistons getting Marcus Smart in like a very similar salary dump.
I would have liked to get in on the Jake LaRavia situation there.
I've always liked him.
And he ended up in Sacramento. I think that'll be a good spot for Jake LaRavia. Just I think he immediately fits into the rotation. So good question though, Cade. This is actually very interesting. Do you guys think Schroeder is okay coming off the bench? So just for reference, this season he's played 47 games, started 41. Over the last 5 seasons, that includes this season, so not 5 full seasons, 318 games, he started 239. I assume he will come off the bench, but it will be a touch different for him in regards to that because he has been starting a lot, especially this season.
I think he'll be fine coming off the bench. Yeah, I don't foresee that being an issue. He's running a team with K. Like, I'm sure you know the situation coming in. So
also, I think this is a trend, Omari. What did we talk about with Tobias, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Malik Beasley in the offseason? Those guys all played a ton of games, right? Ability. So over the past 5 seasons, Schroeder has played 318 games. If you divide that by 4.5, because he hasn't played a full year this year, that's 70 games. Like, this is another guy who has played a ton of games throughout his career and averages 30 minutes a night. To me, as you look at, even whenever it becomes to a big swing, I don't think Trajan's making a move on a guy with an injury history or somebody like that. So to me, in 2 sets of equations, last offseason and this deadline, Trajan has shown his hand that he wants guys. I would say floor spacing was obviously prioritized. It's not like Schroeder can't shoot at all, but being available is something that he values, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that availability's helped them this season for sure. I mean, they've been, I think, relatively healthy compared to past years, but yeah, like all of your vets, I've played probably all but maybe 2 or 3 games for each of them, which has been really good.
Yeah. Okay. The original Omari, please give thoughts on Ivy getting some run before the season ends and available for playoffs. What do we think there? Oh,
yeah, they updated his status again today. He'll just be evaluated in another month. He's doing like water therapy stuff, and he's in a boot. But I mean, I would not bank on him coming back, like unless there's like enough runway for him to like really be in shape if they make a deep enough playoff run. They're just not going to rush him back. Like, it's a broken bone. Like, we kind of know what to expect as far as those types of injuries. And if he comes back, like, for him to come back at the beginning of April would just be extremely aggressive. So, yeah, like in my mind, if he does come back this season, it would still more likely be like in a postseason scenario.
All right, last few here. We'll get through them. Stevie J says, "What about Mo Bamba?" Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with a name even like that is, who are you going to then waive off the roster? So it's like, okay, are you going to waive Lindy now to bring in Mo Bamba? Is Mo Bamba willing to come to Detroit to be, I mean, he'd be the 3rd center at best, to be honest, Steve. Like, I kind of am okay with the Paul Reed minutes. And in my recent posts on the Substack, I've been kind of pushing for like, hey, I wouldn't mind if Paul Reed got a 5-minute stretch kind of every game. So I know Mo Bamba has these physical tools that are really intriguing, really enticing. I would understand why you would think about taking a flyer on him. I just wonder if Mo would look at Detroit as a situation where, hey, this is where I could go and actually get minutes to try to stick and find my way back onto a roster. So I don't know that it makes sense for him.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Like, their center rotation is pretty set. That's probably not an area you need to look at tweaking too much at this point.
All right. Stephen P. How's Tobias? Oh, also, thank you for the super chat there. Thank you very much for that. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you. How's Tobias?
Let's check the 7:30 injury report. How is Tobias? Tobias is uh Pistons are low on here. Oh, here they go. Beasley's probable, Cade's questionable. Tobias is probable with a calf contusion. So probably plays tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Last couple real quick. Steven's thoughts on BI going to Detroit, or excuse me, not Detroit. Woo. Glad that wasn't Freudian. Toronto, not a fan. I don't think it makes any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Somebody said this is like the fourth straight deadline they've traded a pick for an expiring contract, and it's like what kind of team building is this? Like I don't know what they're doing. So no, I said a couple days ago in the pod, like I figured of all the guys on that roster, Bi was the one who would be traded, but I didn't think he would end up in Toronto. So
What's Toronto trying? I don't know what. Yeah, Adam says like Pistons trading for Blake.
that made more sense. Like at least Blake was better than Ingram is now. Like, at least they traded for like an all NBA guy.
Chuck says, what's Toronto trying? I don't know, Chuck. The best salmon I could come up with is they're just trying to acquire as much talent as possible. And then yeah, I don't know. I'll let you read this one.
All right, let me nerd out. We're hoping Schroeder can be piezoelectric against us. He was electric and put in the work. So it's just natural that now he's putting in the work for us and it'll be electric. But what is piezoelectric? Like, what am I missing?
This was him talking about the scientific theory of he was good against the Pistons. Now he'll be good for the Pistons. Okay. So he was shooting his shot with that. So
man, it went over my head. So that was pretty smart. Like, I'll give it to you.
All right. Guys, thank you so much. Obviously we could stay here for a little bit longer, but Omari's had a long 24 hours. I'm ready to go to bed, to be honest with you. So, we appreciate you.
Piezoelectric has to do with converting mechanical injury into electrical and vice versa. Learn something new. That's the fun fact of the day. Thank you, Tweet House. Sorry to cut you off, Bryce, but
no, you're good.
That in there.
Arthur said it's hard to argue with Masai, but I don't get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm arguing with Masai. I don't get it.
Michael, thanks, guys. Get some rest. Dallas up 20 on Boston. Oh, yeah. This is the best part now is all these games start happening with new players and we get to evaluate all of that. Have a great night. Yeah. Thank you. Like, subscribe, share, rate, review. Come back in a few days. Subscribe to the Detroit Free Press and read Omari's work. Subscribe to the Motor City Hoops Substack and read my work. It's free. Listen to the Pin Down on Detroit Bad Boys. And since Robin's here, Robin, you're the man. We appreciate you.
Yes, Omari, Robin. Thank you so much for everything, as always.
O2, take it away.
All right. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Dakota Avery Nichols, and big thanks to Wes Davenport, as always. And we will talk to you all next week.